Welcome to the Health Data Ethics Podcast. I'm Jenny Owens, and today I'm thinking about cognitive biases in the context of machine learning. So, when we talked about artificial intelligence and machine learning in the context of, ChatGPT and the various chatbots that are out there, we talked about this concept of hallucinations, right? When the chatbot kind of runs off the rails and ends up saying things that are not true or creating kind of an alternative reality in which it has received a degree in public health or, whatever. I started wondering about, okay, so if machines can learn, can they have cognitive biases? If they're thinking, do they have cognitive biases? This is a particular interest of mine because way back in the very, very early days of my research coordination, if anybody has been a research coordinator, you know that there are days that are extremely, extremely busy. And then there are days where you spend absolutely hours waiting for somebody to give you a piece of data or for the patient to show up for their appointment. And so during this time, I attempted to spend my time in ways that were productive. And I found myself one day reading through the Wikipedia list of cognitive biases, which I think really should be required reading for just about everybody on the planet. It's fascinating, it's funny, and it gives you a real sense of noticing when you're when you're recognizing these patterns in the media that you're consuming or in the conversations that you're having, and recognizing these patterns in your own thinking and in your own speech. Some of my favorite cognitive biases are things like the anchoring bias, where an early piece of information that you receive or an early technique that you learn tends to be the first thing that you go to. This can be quickly and easily summed up as if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Confirmation bias, which is one that all of us fall prey to all the time. I have an idea. The information that supports this idea is reliable. It's from a solid source. It's well researched. The information that contradicts this idea is bad. Look at their study. It's so poorly formulated. And confirmation bias is actually one of the things that I wrestled with most frequently in my graduate studies, because what you need to do in your graduate studies is flip the script entirely. I have a hypothesis. I need to come up with every way possible to disprove it and then believe those things so hard that in the end, all I am left with is the truth. When I have exhausted every avenue to prove myself wrong, I will believe that I am correct. Kind of Sherlock Holmesy, right? Like when we've removed everything that is impossible, everything left, no matter how implausible, must be the truth. So confirmation bias, one of my favorites, right? And I think about this quite frequently. Um, I love the gambler's fallacy, right? The idea that, I have lost 15 times, so this time is it. It plays into our really human desire to have narrative and to have redemption, and to have a sort of a logical arc to the universe when in fact the universe is random. And one of my very favorites is the fundamental attribution error. This comes up sometimes in management and in interpersonal relations. Fundamental attribution error is the idea that when I make mistakes because I'm so stressed, and it's really unlike me. It was a rare moment of carelessness, but when you make mistakes, it's because you're dumb and you're bad at stuff. That's not the case, right? You're fundamentally attributing other people's errors to a flaw in their character or a flaw in their intellect, whereas my mistakes are honest mistakes that anybody could have made. It's horse feathers, right? I learned about a new one when I was doing research for this particular podcast, and this is my new favorite, the GI Joe fallacy. The GI Joe fallacy is the idea that knowing about cognitive bias makes you less likely to commit cognitive biases. And it's called the GI Joe fallacy because now you know, and knowing is half the battle. Except that's not really true, right? All knowing about cognitive bias does is allow you to retroactively label things or possibly think that, hey, I had this thought, but that doesn't really seem to be the case. I think I'm falling into confirmation bias here. It does not prevent you from committing the bias in the first place. So I started thinking about this in the context of machine learning, right? And you think about, like automated cognition. And I'm wondering, are cognitive biases kind of contagious? Can the artificial intelligence catch them from us? And of course they can, right? Like artificial intelligences absorb bias from their programmers, from their validators. As you're making the algorithm, your own biases are flavoring it. And when you give the output of the algorithm to other people to validate, their own biases are flavoring this. And so what you end up with is this lovely soup that's got a lot of human in it. They're also biased by their data sets, right? If I feed an artificial intelligence a data set of entirely wealthy white women who have only two children, then guess what? It turns out that their children have, way better outcomes. And it's not because of any intervention that we did. It's because the kids grew up with money and without a lot of systemic racism pushing on them. And, like you have to think really carefully about what your data set truly represents and who you're trying to use the outputs of your artificial intelligence on. I found myself wondering, will artificial intelligence give rise to new biases? I mean, we know about hallucinations, but does artificial intelligence have preferences? Does it fall into patterns of thought? And then I thought about, well, how would we know? What would we see? I think this is really interesting, and I'm not sure that we have enough. I'm not sure. Well, I'm very sure that I don't have enough experience to answer this question yet. I think it would be interesting to sort of be a validator and try to see, okay, when we're making these kind of errors, do the errors fall into any particular pattern? I need to look for some meta analyses of the mistakes that AIs tend to make, because I think this is really interesting. If you have experience with artificial intelligence or machine learning, if you have thoughts on the biases that may naturally arise in artificial intelligence, I would love to hear it.